Yeah, so this is just very brief, just to kind of get the ball moving on this. So tonight we're going to take on two prominent neoliberals. The neoliberal way of looking at the world is simple, really, though they mask it as being very complex. The neoliberal believes not in a nation or its people, but rather sees everybody as what my wife likes to call interchangeable widgets. You'll often find the neo-lib having economic discussions where they pretend that all that matters is the dollar sign. And as long as the country has a lot of money being pumped into it, or the GDP growth is going wild, things are just peachy. Things aren't just peachy. The status quo sucks. The defenders of the status quo suck just as bad. Seemingly remarkably disconnected from the real world, the neoliberals incline to lie to you. They'll tell you out of one side of their mouth, they want maximum personal freedom, and out of the other side, tell you how much we need to limit freedom so you're allowed to have any at all. Myself and the missus take a different outlook. We balance responsibility and duty to family and nation along with God. A nation is simply put the lines where the culture and the government of one group of people ends and another begins. These people may be compatible and they may not be compatible, but what is a sure thing is that they have their own unique interests, concepts, values, and cultures. The neoliberal cosmopolitans are just elitists. They believe in a new form of borderless society, which actually goes against their own Enlightenment framework. As the nation state came from the Enlightenment framework, they would have us move back into dynasties, confederacies, and eventually empire. A worldview long ago abandoned as being unworkable every time it's tried. Make no mistake, what we're discussing here is imperialism masked under cosmopolitanism. I don't want empire. I want a strong central nation with a strong people whose value structures are shared, even if they do have some minor cultural differences. The world is not a confederacy or an empire, but a collection of nations with peoples who have their own destiny they share with their own countrymen. A value structure the neolibs would destroy along with the communists. We're here to defend that system tonight, but also to put globalism to the question. On a side note, my previous engagement with Destiny, I've since been totally vindicated on the immigration argument. And while I concede he argued it better than I did, I was still correct. And now we have absolute proof I was correct. And I'm just throwing that out there.
Wait, what? Can you refresh the people in chat that don't remember that argument? What was that about?
My viewpoint on that was that Democrats were essentially allowing the border to stay wide open so that they could win the election, and so that they could win pretty much every election going forward. And they were migrating people around to do that.
Jeez, that's I must have missed the vindication of that claim. But is it our turn?
Yeah, it's your turn.
Yeah. So I don't know, Bastiat, why don't you go first, and then Destiny?
Okay. So I am. It's always fun to hear myself described as kind of a stateless cosmopolitan, a rootless cosmopolitan, as noted red fascist Joseph Stalin might have called me. But that's just not the way to describe it. That's just completely inaccurate, as anybody who's ever watched any of my content or seen any of it would be able to attest. And indeed, I absolutely believe in the United States as an institution, not just as some kind of organic cultural blood and soil creation, but as a political institution, a nation founded on a creed rather than on a set of ethno-religious characteristics, a creed that comes down to maximizing a lot of values that I believe in: personal liberty, personal freedom, on, and all the rest of it. And I think that because I believe in the values of this institution as expressed in our founding documents, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, never perfectly realized, but every decade getting closer to being better realized. Because I believe in that institution, I believe in improving the nation, right, that supports that institution. I believe in better government, more effective government, pursuing equality before the law, rising prosperity so that people have better lives, can more accurately, can best achieve the goals they set out for themselves. And the reason that's important is that a nation is not something that love needs to be forced upon, right? People will organically find affection for their fellow countrymen, for the people that they live around, if they work together to build a better society, right? If they can work together under a democratic framework with a free economy, then there's no need for a state to force nationalism down upon them. They will develop an organic patriotism, a love of country that does not devolve into this excessive xenophobia that Big Papa Fascist seems to be describing here. The problem, I think, that we get with a lot of these folks on the far right, is that they think that people are not capable of forming these sorts of attachments without a state forcing it upon them. And that's why he wants the state to force culture on people. That's why he's very insistent on this idea that culture starts and stops at borders, which, especially when applied to the United States, is ridiculous. Our culture is global in scope and encompasses much of the world these days. Beyond that, I think it's also important to note that the United States has been unique, perhaps among all the nations of the world, in how connected it has always been with the rest of the world through trade, through its involvement around the world, through immigration. So the idea that it could be some kind of blood and soil construct, some kind of isolationist nation, runs counter to all of its history and anything that could realistically be possible given the makeup of this country today. So I think that, it's a nice diversion to talk about neoliberalism, but at the end of the day, the nationalism that Big Papa Fascist wants for the United States is entirely alien to us. And the patriotism that a lot of good Americans actively believe in and support, the patriotism that I believe in, is something that arises when we have a functional country, when we do our part to make it the best we can. We don't need to use the state to force culture on people who otherwise apparently don't feel the need to be a part of it.
All right, Destiny.
Well, I mean, what is there left to say after Bastiat's opening speech? I love the idea of people being able to sort themselves out as they see. Contrary to what Big Papa Fash says, I don't see people as interchangeable widgets. I think that view more closely aligns with somebody that thinks that you can prescribe one lifestyle, be it morally and politically, to an entire nation of people. I think that person is more likely to see people as interchangeable widgets than a neoliberal or a SOCDEM that's more likely to see people, choose to live in different areas, speak different languages, participate in culture as they see fit. I do believe in a strong economy. I think that an economy going well doesn't necessarily mean that all things are peachy, but I think that an economy that goes well does a lot of amazing things. Like, for instance, it allows people across the country to come together on websites and argue with each other on the internet in front of a bunch of other people that are living across the world, watching people argue with each other across the internet. I don't think the status quo sucks. I think we have a lot of problems today that we need to fix. But I mean, with new problems comes new potential solutions. And I look forward to see how we tackle those challenges going forward. I don't necessarily want a borderless society. But I mean, like, to some extent, we have to acknowledge we're already in that era, whether we want to believe that or not. We're on computers with parts that are made in different countries, that are manufactured and developed and researched by people from different countries and then are sold in different countries. Like, everything that we do today is kind of a globalized effort, whether we want to believe it or not. And I think pushing in that direction would be positive to do in the future.
All right, so we can open up the floor now.
All right. You can go ahead, Rach.
Well, I was just listening to Bastiat there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
A little bit of an echo, but I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. I've got we don't usually use a setup up here where I am, so hopefully it's not too bad.
It's better.
What's that?
It's better now.
Okay. So I was listening to Bastiat's speech there, and I was thinking that he kind of did exactly what I thought he would do. Instead of really understanding what BPF was saying there, he kind of took the usual, you guys are xenophobes, racists, homophobes, whatever phobes, right? And that we want to force our worldview on other people, et cetera, et cetera. That's like the common trope that we deal with all the time when people don't actually listen to what we're saying or understand what we're saying. As far as you guys as liberals wanting, freedoms for people, wanting choice for people, I think that without national sovereignty, you don't have that. I don't see how, if you want a globalist system, how you're going to maintain those freedoms. We haven't had much success exporting our democratic ideals, our liberal ideals to the world. That was kind of a Bush doctrine that failed. We are not neocons, so the typical neocon arguments aren't going to work here. If you can't export these ideas to the world, and spread them, how do you think that you're going to just import people from other parts of the world here and they're just going to suddenly see the light and step on the magic dirt and decide that they're Americans and they believe in liberalism and they believe in freedom and democracy? I think that's the part that you guys kind of just say, well, once they get here, it'll all work itself out, right? And that's the part that we don't agree with. We don't think you can just smush a bunch of people from all over the world together, and if everybody has a good job, everything else just kind of works itself out. You know, we give them a pocket constitution and everyone's just on board. I think that's naive.
Okay, so if I might respond to a couple of those points. First of all, the globalist system with the United States in particular. The United States has, I have no idea what risk the United States has of losing its sovereignty. The United States occasionally subjects itself to things like international arbitration or maybe an international court, but it does that of its own choosing. Nobody's forcing it to do so. Nobody could. And so if the United States is choosing to do that, it's doing that because it believes that there's some long-term interest for it to do so. Like back during the Cold War, the interest in these international institutions was to kind of leverage the strength of other countries to build a coalition against the Soviet Union. These international organizations would perhaps someday in the future, if fully fleshed out and developed, be a more affordable, safer, attractive alternative to, say, a world of a war between independent nations punctuated by espionage and coercion, all that kind of stuff. So you can see how a country would want that sort of stuff and nevertheless not be giving up its sovereignty, but rather choosing a better way to resolve its disputes. So that's one. Exporting democracy. President Bush definitely failed to export democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan. But the idea that the United States has historically failed to do that is just not true. The United States succeeded in setting up democracies in Italy, Germany, Japan, Yugoslavia, South Korea. And while it's, of course, not something that always works, it's also not something that is impossible or that has never worked. And speaking of Germany, you're talking about importing people who do not believe in democracy. If you take a look at a map of the United States with all the counties spread out by largest or kind of most prominent ethnic group by numbers by county, it's interesting to see just how half the counties in this country, the largest ethnic group, are Germans who came here in large part during the 19th century from an authoritarian country like Prussia or the other German states. There's no democracy of any sort in Central Europe at the time. These people who came here, they adopted these ideas in part because that's part of the reason they came here, because they couldn't find democracy and freedom in their own countries. That's not the entire reason. Of course, they primarily came here for economic opportunity. But people have been coming here from non-democratic nations for our entire history. I mean, there was a time where the United States was, apart from Britain, the only really democratic country in the world. So the idea that, it's just touching magic dirt. No, people go for democracy and go for, economic opportunity because that's a way that they have the ability to participate in society, right? You got to be here for a while before you start looking at autocracy as a more attractive option than what it is you left.
Yeah, I think it's 1/3. I think it's 1/3 of all Germans in the world live in the United States. Is that right, Bastiat? Looks like you got the figures right there.
I don't know the number. I just know that the huge number of American counties.
So that's nice that they live inside the United States, this bordered nation that we live in, that has borders that you want to get rid of, right?
No,
can we talk real quick, just so we're on like the same page? So because neither me nor Bastiat, or I don't know if Bastiat is, maybe I don't think either of us is arguing that like the entire world's population should live in the United States, right? There obviously needs to be some form of border control. When you say like borderless, what do you think that our position, or do we need to spell that out? Maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, maybe you should spell it out.
All right. Okay. Well, I often talk about being for, quote, open borders immigration. I mean, what that means is effectively that if you wanted to come to the United States, you would have to be, subject to whatever checks for disease and goods and contraband and all the rest of it. But long story short, if the government didn't have a reason to keep you out, well, then you'd be able to get into the country.
Yeah, so people should be able to like sort themselves out economically as they see fit. Obviously, we're still doing like whatever the basic checks are. If you come over and you've had a history of like being part of the fucking Taliban or some shit, you're probably not going to make it. If you've got a ton of disease, you're probably not going to make it. There might be some sort of like minimum economic check. I know for a lot of other countries around the world, if you have like a certain amount of capital, they'll just let you like move there and become a citizen. I think in New Zealand, if you invest like $500K into a business, they'll like they'll just make you a citizen or shit like that. So I mean, like there could be like requirements like that, but basically the idea is that there exists some advantage in terms of getting like talented people or people willing to work into our country, and to set up arbitrary roadblocks based on like their skin color or religion or something, I think does a disservice to the native people that live here.
Okay, got it. So just to flesh this out more, so you're going to have a closed border where people are checked for diseases and checks are done on them and this kind of thing. That doesn't sound like an open border at all.
Well, technically, every border by definition is, if it's a border, it's closed and open in some way. Like our current border is open. Well, you might.
Yeah, I mean, it's open.
Like,
no, it's not
compared
open.
to what we
It's
have
not
now,
required
where
that you can't come in.
well,
There's
I mean,
laws
like
specifically that say that you cannot come in unless you come the right way. So what we're asking is, if you're fleshing this out for us and you're saying, look, we're going to be doing all sorts of different checks on you to make sure that you're allowed to come into the country, I don't really see how that's too much different than what we have right now. Exactly.
Well,
the
because
big
it depends.
difference is with you, and it's like looking back at Ellis Island in the earlier part of the 20th century, for example, where you had to go through a process that maybe took about a week or something, but then that was pretty much the end of it. As opposed to now, where the process can take months or years before you can get into the United States legally. That's the difference, is to make it much easier.
And I think we need to be honest. I think it's a little bit absurd to think, there might be some people that argue, but the idea that we literally completely get rid of the border and anybody can wander in and out as they please, I mean, like, that's a pretty extremely stupid position to defend. I can't imagine that there are that many people that earnestly believe in that idea of open borders, of no checks, no social security numbers, no green cards, just anybody who wants can come into the country without the government checking at all.
Okay, so all these people would have to have green cards under your guys' system.
Yeah, of course. But the difference would be that, like, it would be way easier to get. So there's 13 million or so illegal immigrants here right now. They need a path to citizenship. Like, whatever dumb shit we're doing right now is a waste of time. They should be made citizens. And then if you want to move here and you have the means to do so, and you don't have like a disease or some pre-existing thing that would keep you out, like being part of a terrorist group or maybe like a member of a foreign army, like you'd be allowed into the country basically.
Yeah, which again, compared to right now, would be comparably open next to what we've got now.
You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. I wanted to clear up what you guys think of as nationalism. So what does nationalism mean to you if, you don't have a big dispute with us on borders, you're not open borders globalists? What is you guys' actual like stance on nationalism?
Just to be clear real quick, I think we do have massive disputes on the border. So we're kind of equivocating on being like, we're both like, oh, well, there's different requirements. But it sounds to me like me and Bastiat would let far more people in than you guys would. Right. If the whole debate was literally just like, are you in favor of literally erasing the border off the map and letting someone come in and out? That's a little disappointing because I don't think that's where most of the border disputes lie. I think it lies in who we let in. In terms
so you
of
guys aren't for the like giant caravans of illegals necessarily.
Well, I mean, in our definition, they wouldn't be illegal, right? You probably get them to the border, process them, and let them into the country, right?
And so, things wouldn't happen the way they do now because you would have an expectation that would be much easier to get in the United States. So you wouldn't have some of the madness that you have now, where maybe a large number of people will break through a fence or something. You wouldn't need that because it would be much easier to get in legally.
And
so
go ahead.
I was just going to say, what's a nation to you guys then? If it's anybody can kind of come in, you do a quick check, but there's no like real limit on how many or who or where from, other than like, you can't have a disease or be a terrorist.
In terms of like what a nation is, so like this is perspective that I have from my parents. My mom and dad used to be in the Air Force, and they told me that when they deployed to like Okinawa or when they go to places in Asia, that like when they would step off base, they were in a whole other world. That's how different the world was back then. People today like to act like these solid, individual nations exist and they're totally separated, but I don't think that's true. So when you ask like what is a nation, I mean, like right now, roughly, it's just basically like a set of borders that has one group of people that are governed by common laws, and that seems to be it. Like we get our production from other areas, we have citizens from other areas, we've got culture from other areas, we've got like a whole bunch of other shit from other areas. I would challenge, or I would curious what you guys would consider like what is a nation, or in your eyes, what would a nation be, and how much stuff would we have to get rid of or roll back to protect that idea of what a nation is to you?
Like to be clear, you're saying, Destiny, the big differentiating feature is the set of laws that the society
that's what makes it like
structured around. Like the border is effectively where one law ends and another begins.
There's any culture at all, Destiny? You just think that it's just people who are inside the confines of lines?
Well, so to fast forward this argument a bit, I mean, because my standard response is I'm going to challenge you. Tell me what U.S. culture is. You're going to give me some vague answer, and then I'm going to say, tell me what's like the commonality between somebody that lives in a town in Alabama versus somebody that lives in San Francisco. And then I'm going to point to you that I can find more similarities between conservatives in Alabama and Saudi Arabia than I can between people in Alabama and San Francisco. Like,
but they don't look through the prism of the Constitution like the individuals in the United States do. That's one of the primary differences.
Say that again? Sorry.
One of the primary differences is that we're federalists, so we all look through the prism of the Constitution.
No, I don't think so.
I think so, and that's one of the most uniting features amongst Americans. It's one of the features that you don't see overseas. So you can make the comparison and say, well, the culture over here is actually more similar to the culture in Alabama, for instance, in a different country. You might be right, except they're not looking through the prism of the Constitution.
Can you answer me? How can you wait real quick? I'm just curious to answer this question. How can you tell me that we all look through the similar culture or through the similar prism of the Constitution, and then on the other breath, like tell me that liberals want to repeal the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, or that you like want to repeal like the 19th Amendment or something like that? Like clearly, we all view the Constitution in very different ways. As somebody that lives in California and can't buy any fun firearms, I can tell you that people here view the Constitution way differently.
That may be true, but you're still looking through the prism of the Constitution. Whether your interpretation of it is different from mine or not, we're still looking through the same prism.
But that's something that changes based on what side of the line you're on. But I mean, it's important to remember that on the other side of the line here in the United States and Canada, we have a country that is very similar in terms of it being a big federal continental country. Democracy, it's a different kind of democracy, but in the end, it's not something that's so alien that it would be a major shift for somebody to switch countries. And in Mexico, it's the same thing. I mean, Mexico is suffering from a lot of crime and corruption right now, in part, perhaps large part, thanks to our drug war. But in the end, it's still another democracy. It's a federal republic. The official name of the country is the United States of Mexico. It's a society that is not politically alien to the United States at all. In some ways, it may be closer in design. So it's not like these are alien, societies. They have a different constitution because they're on a different side of this line. But when you switch, you have a lot of the same sorts of expectations for rights and procedures
And you literally even have like sanctuary cities that reject like federal law and immigration, or you literally have states that are making things legal that are illegal on a federal level, like marijuana or gay marriage.
That's true, and that's due to the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment is absolutely something that you would be looking at if you were looking through the prism of the Constitution.
Well, but then you've basically made it so that can you give me an example of a view that might come into the United States then that wouldn't be through the prism of the Constitution? Because literally everything passes under that bar then.
Yeah, I don't know. Anybody who was after like Sharia law, let's say, or anybody who was after...
Wait, so Sharia law, so things like enshrining religious doctrine in our law? Because there's a lot of conservatives in the United States that want to do stuff like that, making like incest or sodomy illegal.
And we understand that, but let me finish my point. My point is that, of course, there's value structures that people can bring where they're not looking through the prism of the U.S. Constitution, absolutely, which is a pivotal part of our culture. That's just true. It just is.
You can't just say it is true.
Well, one of the things you'll find, right, is that if you talk to people abroad, one of the ways that they describe American culture is that they're very constitutional centric. Okay. Yeah, there's just so much that's not true about this. So as somebody that used to be a practicing Catholic, so when you say things like Sharia law, having this separate set of like rules and punishments or whatever, this exists in the Catholic Church. We call it reconciliation and contrition. You break a Catholic Church law and so are you telling me that no Catholic, like they literally look up to the Pope as their like spiritual leader, like more so than the President of the United States? So much so that it's caused issues in the past where people are worried about Catholic as a spiritual leader, but not as the physical leader of their nation.
But maybe not as a physical leader of their nation, but they definitely look to it for moral laws. You can have Sharia law that doesn't
Catholics divide themselves and also say that you can look at the Pope as a spiritual leader as the body of the church, but you can also reject what he says as not being canonical or not being correct. There's different rules of thought when it comes to Catholicism. I don't see what the hell that has to do with the fact that most Americans look through a constitutional lens, though.
Okay, that's all I wanted you to say. So earlier, I asked you what the unifying thing was about the United States, and you said it's the fact that all of us look through the constitutional lens, but now you've conceded to me that most people look through the constitutional lens.
That's a bunch of semantics.
Well, I'm curious, when you say most, are there some people then that are living in America that aren't American to you? Or what do you mean by that? I'll let you amend the statement. I'm trying to catch you.
People who live inside the United States who are not American, Destiny, lots and lots.
So by what you just said, that most people look through a constitutional lens, can you give me an example of some of those that don't look through a constitutional lens that wouldn't qualify as being American to you?
No, well, I mean, they would still qualify as far as their citizenship goes, but that wouldn't
I'm
necessarily.
not asking about their citizenship. I'm saying in
wouldn't
Big Papa
necessarily
Fash's
mean
eyes.
that they would be very well culturally integrated.
Well, but that's what I'm asking you, because I'm looking to you because you challenged me by saying there must be some common American culture, and then I asked you what that would mean.
That's the commonality in American culture. Now, you can't ascribe it to every single human being, but for the most part, you can ascribe it to most people. Yes.
Sure, but if there are people that fall outside of that, then my question is there just an atypical American experience? Because if you're going to grant me that, then I'm going to say, well, there might just be some immigrants that could come in and have an atypical American experience.
I'm sure that there could be.
Well,
Actually,
then what do we disagree
I
on?
jump in here and help you guys. I think I could help you out here.
Sure.
So I'm glad that you all agree that there are different groups in the United States who, like you said, somebody in small town Alabama, what do they have in common with someone in San Francisco? This has been a struggle that Americans have had since, the beginning, since we got to be a pretty larger nation. It started as these Puritan, very religious Puritans, and 100 years later, it really wasn't like that anymore. And I think the whole point of this, the reason that Andy and I wanted to talk about nationalism is because we believe that if you don't have nationalist populism, there's a very good chance that this nation will end up balkanized, that it will not stay together, especially if you flood the country with immigrants. Nationalist populism is the thing that people can unite under, that urban blacks, that rural whites, that Asians in San Francisco, that Mexicans in Texas who are first generation immigrants can all unite under. If we don't have national populism, we do have a problem because of the fact that we don't organically have a very monocultured type of a society like maybe Sweden or Iceland or Japan would have.
I don't think anybody's advocating for a monoculture. In terms of what you mean by, maybe we should ask this, what's the difference between nationalism and patriotism? Or our side could define that, I guess, or you could define it, because we need to understand what we're talking about.
Well, I would say that patriotism is kind of a sentimental idea, whereas nationalism is it could be more of a policy driven type of a thing rather than just a sentimental idea, rather than just, we have people in the country right now where half of them think you should go to jail for burning the flag and the other half think that you should burn the flag. So if you had a more nationalistic type of a society, if you had the government promoting American nationalism, we're not saying monoculture. We're not, like I just said, we are not saying blacks in urban Atlanta need to be the same as me here in the rural Midwest. What we're saying is the one thing we can all unite under is a banner of nationalist populism. And it would be better to have that than to have balkanization or have people constantly infighting, which is what we experienced last year. We had constant infighting among groups.
The situation you described with balkanization, the United States, quote unquote, I guess balkanized, as they broke up one time over an economic issue, primarily economic. There's nothing of comparable gravity or regionalism in the United States today, and all the kinds of disparate or differences and situations, discord and disagreements that you've described here. There are no clean lines, no regionalism to match. There's no credible risk of the United States breaking up at all.
She didn't say that there. Listen to me.
And the idea that this is just going to happen, and therefore we need to have a nationalistic government.
That's not what she's
the idea
saying.
that this could happen. That was the reason why we need to have a government that promotes "quote unquote" American nationalism. And I know while you're apparently not talking about a monoculture, if you're talking about a government that promotes "quote unquote" nationalism, then presumably you're talking about a government that promotes certain policies designed to get more people behind a common set of experience and belief, which seems like the opposite thing you'd want to do if you'd want to preserve unity in a diverse continental-sized country.
Why? Why is that contrary? That makes no sense.
Because under our framework, this goes back to Federalist number 10, where Hamilton said, look, democracy in a big republic can work because all of these different interests can keep each other in check. Everybody has the opportunity to put their policy into practice, to have the ability to sort of have a corner of this great country where they can be themselves, as far as possible under our constitutional framework. Well, but the idea of trying to squeeze everybody into a narrower box.
Way to cherry pick federalism. But the thing is, Bastiat, is look, we all live under one federal government.
Right.
Everybody does. There's no particularly good reason why you can't promote nationalism, or the federal government cannot promote nationalism. and make a strong state. There's no good reason why they can't do that. There's no good reason why they shouldn't do that.
I don't think either of us disagree.
What is nationalism and a strong state to you? Because I mean, the United States government is a pretty strong state.
How many times do you want this redefined?
I don't.
Okay, wait. First of all, the first definition was a little bit like unclear, which is fine. But so more concretely, I think what we would ask is like, what's an example of like a nationalistic policy?
A nationalistic policy at the federal government level. Maybe you could look at infrastructure might be a nationalistic policy. You could look at maybe different economic incentives via taxation, things like that could be nationalistic policies. There's
basically the entire Trump and Pat Buchanan America First agenda. Yeah, those were both attempts to unite the different factions of the republic under a banner of nationalism. It's the way you overcome all of the racial differences and religious differences. It's the reason you can have a country with freedom of religion, with multiple cultures, with multiple races, because you can unite them under love of country and love of your nation. It doesn't, like he said, those two aren't mutually exclusive.
So like Thomas Jefferson said, we're all Republicans, we're all Federalists.
So I don't think either of us would disagree with either of that. But the weird thing, though, is that like everything you're giving me is like 100% not the Trump agenda and absolutely the Biden agenda. So when we look at, for instance, like infrastructure, that's what's working its way through Congress right now. There's a question of if any Republicans are going to be on board with that, the massive infrastructure. But when you talk about economic incentives, that's baked into the last coronavirus relief and potentially like the new infrastructure bill going forward. Like that's economic incentives that Biden has for working class families. When you talk about attempts to unite the republic, if you look at Biden's rhetoric, he's not a Republican or a Democratic president. He's the president of the entire United States. He's the president of every American. When you talk about a country with religious freedom, Trump is the one that's holding up the Bible and saying, this is my holy book. This is one of the best books ever written. I think it's my first favorite or second favorite behind my book or whatever, right? It feels like everything you're giving me right now is like 100%
None of
Biden's
that has
rhetoric.
Anything to do with anything. Who cares if Biden has what you consider portions of a nationalistic agenda? Good. He also has portions of things that are not a nationalistic agenda, like what you guys consider open border immigration.
Well, what part of Trump? What part of Trump
wants to move in?
What part of Trump was considered a nationalistic agenda? Was it the massive tax cuts for wealthy corporations?
How's this for a massive infrastructure project? The wall. That would have been a very highly nationalistic project. That's just one example among many.
You're a
level country here.
You're a real life.
Nothing of the sort. Go ahead.
Well, okay, I'm sorry. This is true. Yeah. You're a real life person. You drive to work. Okay.
Yeah.
I've driven all over this country for a long time, and I'm sorry, but the idea that investment of our infrastructure, as somebody that's driven on roads in the Midwest that are fucking falling apart, as somebody that wants to move to Miami where buildings are fucking collapsing, as somebody that is like watching flooding happening like around the world and shit, as somebody that is watching like the dramatic change in climate across the Northwest where they don't have air conditioners, because how are you telling me that a wall is the type of infrastructure investment that people across the country are looking forward to?
Whether you agree that the wall was a good idea or a bad idea is irrelevant. I was giving you an example of something that would be nationalistic. So when we're talking
hold on. We're asking you for examples. You can't give me an example, and then when I push back on why your example is dog shit, say, well, that's not relevant. It absolutely is relevant. You brought it up as an example.
Dog shit. What you're doing is saying, I don't agree with this example of nationalism, not saying that it's not an example of government nationalism.
Well, I've got two
presidents. One president is going to unite disparate people, though, not just something that 50% of the population is down with.
No, nationalistic policy is going to unite the nation on a wide scale. That's just bullshit, and he made it up. Nationalistic policy is not necessarily there to unite everybody.
Okay, you literally said, I'm writing these down. Hold on, I'm writing these down as you said them. You said united under love of country / nation. The wall was the most divisive thing. It even divided Republicans.
They can be, and policy on the national level can be divisive, like the coronavirus. Right now, you pushing vaccines pretty hard. That's a pretty divisive policy, but most certainly it's a nationalistic policy, and there's a lot of nationalistic propaganda around it, isn't there?
Let me ask you, what makes a policy nationalistic? Like, because if we're talking about the wall, for example, the wall is divisive. The wall comes with great. Well, let me just explain why I'm skeptical of this. Maybe we can go to another policy. I don't know, but the wall is divisive. It comes at the expense of the taxpayer to the tune of several billions of dollars. The economic benefits are not there. It requires the use of eminent domain to take land from citizens that do not want to give it up. And when you're done with it, the wall
What
is something
would
that
make it
immigrants will still be able to
nationalistic?
pop and break through. So it doesn't seem to provide any benefit
So
of
what
any
would make
sort.
the
What makes
policy
it nationalistic?
What would make the policy nationalistic, to answer your question, would be that the federal government and the body of the government of elected officials are pushing it specifically for the purposes of benefiting its own people. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to benefit all of the people, or that it won't even be a divisive policy, but that doesn't mean that it's not a nationalistic policy.
You literally named this is every single policy.
Yeah,
in
this is
existence.
governments I'm really curious about this. I don't know what governments do that is not in the interest of their governments. Like when you say an America First policy, when does the United States government implement policy without, thinking this will benefit the United States in some way?
Well, I could tell you.
Right?
I could maybe clarify that for you. So when we're talking about nationalism, the things that Andrew and I don't like to see, the things that worry or concern us, because we have 5 children and we hope to have a lot of grandkids, and there's going to be a lot of Wilsons running around in the decades to come, we don't like to see things like transnational corporations, special interests, foreign nations coming in and having so much influence in government policy, in how things are done. And people who are fine with globalism and think that globalism is good, nationalism is some kind of tribal, racist, xenophobic thing. And globalism is the loving, accepting, nice thing. Have no problem with huge corporations coming in. You saw this again during coronavirus where, certain states would say, okay, we're going to lift this mask mandate. You don't have to have it anymore. And then all these giant mega corporations like Target or Home Depot or Walmart can say, well, we're going to still require it. We don't care about your state laws. Where tech corporations can decide they're going to silence people. And, Florida's trying to pass laws saying you can't exactly do that, kind of similar to what Poland did. We don't like undue international influence and foreign influence in our government. So that would be, I think, a point of disagreement we have with you guys. I think we all agree on infrastructure. We all agree on, you guys kind of conceded that you agree that we have to have some kind of a border and we have to have some kind of qualifications. Maybe we disagree on what those would be, how many or whatever. But how do you guys feel about these giant international corporations having at least as much power as our government?
Just to be quick, we have absolutely not conceded on a single point, firstly. Secondly, we clearly don't agree on what infrastructure is. A wall on the border is not infrastructure. Like renovating our buildings, our bridges, our roads, our power plants, that's infrastructure.
Do buildings have walls, Destiny?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess it's part of infrastructure then.
If you have a useless if the government has built a useless object that benefits nobody, it doesn't.
How is it
the fact that it's built something does not make it infrastructure.
Just so real quick, and we might have differences of opinion on that. That's fine. Wait, real quick.
If there's a gate in front of the post office, that's not part of the infrastructure.
We might have differences on what infrastructure means. You can laugh all you want, but I don't think people think that just building a building makes it infrastructure. Usually, when you're talking to Americans, especially working class Americans, the infrastructure that they're concerned with, like here in California, the stability of your power grid, or in Texas, people are aware of this, right? That's an infrastructure improvement.
If you're worried about the stability of your power grid, then you should want that wall built, because if you have a massive uncontrolled influx of people coming in that you don't even know how many there are, that's going to stress your power grid. So that wall would be very helpful.
I really look forward to the studies to come out showing that immigration is what causes our power grids to fail. I don't think that's the case, but regardless, I think that in investments and think that was your implication. In regardless of that, when we say investments in infrastructure, we're not just talking border walls or border security. This is like immigration policy. Okay, well, you can keep saying that you didn't say that you were, but every time I push you an example, you give me something that you want to retreat from as soon as I push you just a little bit on it. Number one. Number two, I would appreciate it if you stop saying, don't characterize our positions as attacking you for being tribal and racist and xenophobic. I don't believe either of us have said that. Nobody's talking about being tribal, racist, xenophobic. We're just talking about...
He literally said xenophobic. I mean,
he said xenophobic one time in his opening statement, sure, but we're not like sitting here attacking you that. We're going point by point over why we think your particular policies are bad. It's not just because they're xenophobic or just because we want to be tribalist or whatever. We just think these are bad policies. And then in terms of like and this is another thing that I get confused on in terms of trying to figure out like what is your concise position. So you say things like our common culture is looking through the prism of the Constitution, but then you seem to be upset when companies practice their First Amendment right to say remove people from their premises who don't wear masks, or say silence people on their private platforms if they deem that to be a thing. That these are all things that are protected by the First Amendment. And then you talk about like hating transnational corporations or foreign nations having interests, or like what? What do you mean by a transnational corporation? Are you just mad that any corporation is in another area?
Oh, man,
or
that's
like,
a huge gish gallop. Just one point at a time. Let us take
okay, if you want to do real quick, if you want to do one point at a time, you can. But I'm just writing down everything you're saying and I'm responding to it. So if you're accusing me of gish galloping, the irony is I'm just responding to your point. So for me to gish gallop, you need to gish gallop first. I'm only responding to the things that you said directly. And there's even one point that I left off here about special interests that I didn't respond to. So I'm only responding to exactly what you're saying. If you want to go line by line, do it.
What do you want to know first?
How about that bit about the Constitution, where on the one hand you venerate it as an object that unites us, which sure, I agree with that, but then you were openly, repeatedly scornful
I didn't say
that basic constitutional rights.
It was uniting necessarily. What I said is that as part of our culture, we look through it as a prism. Just like if you were a part of maybe a Christian culture, you'd look through the Bible as your prism. That's my overarching point. There is a commonality inside the American culture called the federal Constitution. Yes.
Well, but you realize that Christians inside the country that look through the lens of their religion before like any type of federal doctrine, like these people are literally practicing a form of Sharia law. Like that's what that means, right?
No, they keep them separate.
No, they don't. Sharia law literally is a separate doctrine.
I'm not talking about Sharia law. I was talking about Christians.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. But earlier, you made a reference to the fact that people coming over practicing Sharia law would be an example of being un-American. And I'm telling you that there are groups of Christians in the United States that have their whole own separate set of like bylaws. And if you break them, here's the punishments. That's roughly what Sharia law is having your own set of rules and punishments that are separate from any federal or state system.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think it's okay, but you said it wasn't okay. You made it sound like that made you un-American.
That is pretty un-American. I feel like it's such a non sequitur.
It's not I'm literally addressing the point you're exactly bringing up.
Like, look, there's Sharia law, right? And people who are practicing Sharia law, that's un-American because they're not practicing the Constitution. All I'm saying is that most Americans look through the prism of the Constitution as a uniter. That's all. Sure. Not saying that there's not other groups that don't do that inside of America, because there clearly are. I don't really see what you're saying has to do with what I'm saying.
Well, quite strange to it's quite strange to talk about the prism of the Constitution. Anybody who finds themselves in some kind of legal jeopardy or is trying to interface with the government feels like they have been trampled upon is going to look through the prism of the Constitution as their first tool in their toolkit. I mean, communists, Nazis are facing some kind of federal oppression, even if their response, even if their deepest belief is to overthrow the government of the United States and shred our quote unquote antiquated Constitution. Of course, they're going to use the Constitution to protect themselves as far as possible. Everybody in this country does that so far as
that doesn't mean that they're looking through the prism of it just because they're protecting themselves.
What I'm saying is it's a natural thing. The incentive is there at the start. To the extent the Constitution benefits you, and it benefits most people who want to speak freely, carry weapons, on and on, all the rest of it. I mean, that incentive is there. You don't need to teach people to love the Constitution because they will appreciate that Constitution in all kinds of basic life situations involving the government. That just happens naturally.
I think you guys are getting too caught up on this. You asked specifically for an example of something that I thought was unique amongst this culture that is not unique amongst other cultures. And what I told you is one of those things is looking through the prism of the Constitution. I don't think that is the crux of our argument at all. It was just an example to give you.
Sure. So real quick, the way that arguments work is typically you have a series of premises, and taken all together, these premises naturally lead into a conclusion. So we asked you for these kind of like general defining principles,
which I gave you.
Them to it. Yeah, but they're kind of wishy-washy. So we didn't understand, or I didn't understand. So I just asked for like a couple examples. And every time we get an example, it seems like a poor example, and we push back on it. And then you get upset that we're pushing back on it. So you got upset that we pushed back on the wall. You're getting upset that we're pushing back on Christians practicing separate laws. You're not pushing back. You're abandoning your examples.
That's not infrastructure.
In the beginning of this debate, sure, but in the beginning of this debate, you literally got upset that I said that the only thing that separates one country from another is laws, and now you're telling me literally that the thing that makes us Americans is that we look through the Constitution.
No,
I don't actually know what your position is right now. I have no idea.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that's one part of the culture. Yes. And it's one of the uniting parts of the culture. And specifically, looking through the prism of the Constitution is part of the defining nature of Americans inside the United States.
Sure.
It's part of the culture. That's all I'm saying.
Do you agree? Do you understand how weak your argument looks when literally one of the things that we battle for the most over the presidential election cycle is to change the Constitution? That it is probably one of the like incredibly divisive things that Americans look at, where we're trying to constantly get the Constitution updated or amended. Look at the Texas abortion law going through.
So we're all looking through that prism then. Got it.
Well, by
the-
definition,
I think
anybody
he's making,
participating in the American system is looking through the lens of the Constitution.
It sounds like what you're saying more is just sort of a broad appreciation for the idea of the Constitution, the idea of following processes,
Actually,
rule of law. But the
you know what? I'm
Constitution
done.
itself.
I just realized Big Papa Fash just completely owned us in this debate by giving us the best argument. Technically, every single country that does business with the United States of America and every single person that wants to do business with the United States of America at some point is crossing some law that is granted to us by the Constitution, therefore meaning that the entire world is superseded by the U.S. Constitution, which actually means we're a globalist nation by your own fascist definition.
That makes no sense.
What part of that didn't make sense? And I can explain it for you.
You're saying that because other countries have to engage with our laws when we entreat with them, that means that the Constitution supersedes all of their own law?
Correct. You're saying that just because you have to engage with U.S. law when you're in the United States, that somehow the Constitution is your unifying rally cry. That must mean the same with every other country that does business with the United States.
You're just hung up on the point where I gave you one example of a unifying prism that we have. That's it.
I know I'm not as aggressive as the rest of you guys here, but I just wanted to try to get this conversation back on track because BPF and Destiny have like a thing where they like to yell at each other. What I would like to talk about, if we're talking about nationalism, is things like undue global influence. Okay. The things that I have a problem with, the things that I don't want to see in my nation, and the reason I want to preserve my nation's sovereignty is because I don't want our policy being based on UN policy. I reject things like UN Agenda 2030. I reject things like free trade and NAFTA, things that are not in our national interest, but are instead in the interest of a global community. When you hear this rhetoric like this global citizen nonsense, when you see, huge transnational corporations, they're not American companies necessarily. They are global companies that take advantage of our Constitution and our free speech and things like that. They get courts to rule that their corporations are people and things like that. So we've got all of this undue international influence. We've got these entities like the World Health Organization and the United Nations making policy, and then our government just goes, okay, and adopts it. I would like to see national sovereignty restored. I think it's been taken away. I think it's been chipped away at to the point that it's practically meaningless at this point. And that was all done through Cold War propaganda and shit like that.
Right. When you collaborate,
national sovereignty.
When you collaborate with somebody to accomplish a shared task, are you giving up your individual agency by throwing in with somebody to achieve a shared objective?
Cooperation is not the same as adopting international policy.
Wait, what is
adopt international laws and policy and say, well, it's, we're just that's not cooperation.
Well, here's the thing though. Like there is no entity that is forcing the United States to do this. No other entity, as Stalin said when the Pope disagreed about something with him. He said, "Oh, that's very nice. How many divisions does the Pope have?" Right? Like, who is forcing the United States? At the end of the day, we have all the levers, all the guns, all the control over international finance. That's not to say that the United States is invincible. But
why are you pretending that massive corporate lobbying isn't a huge factor in writing policy, Bastiat?
Okay. So
but wait, corporate lobbying, it could be American corporations.
Right. Like,
in fact,
one thing that's really strange is that it seems like you're saying that we trust American corporations more than foreign corporations, when in fact those foreign corporations at least provide a source of competition for your domestic corporations. In Canada, for example, they've got some relatively antiquated nationalist laws that are designed to keep out American providers of telecommunications. And as a result, their communication stuff is just way more expensive than it would otherwise be. It does benefit a certain domestic interest, but at the expense of the rest of the country. And by keeping out that American competition, primarily what they're worried about, they have only made themselves poor in the process. So like they have aided inefficiency in their own country. They haven't done anything for their country in the process. And yet that sounds like the kind of, worry that you've got here. American corporation better than foreign corporation. No, what matters is what these corporations, how they're interfacing with our government and what kind of services and goods they're providing to people in this country. Whether they are based here or there is irrelevant. As the commies often say, capital has no country. And, it's true,
So to get this right, you think that foreign lobbying is fine?
Wait, what does foreign lobbying mean?
It means foreign nations and corporations lobbying our government with bribes, essentially.
So right now that's illegal. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Like, to the extent that there are lobbyists.
You don't know what I'm talking. So it's illegal. So it doesn't happen.
Well,
no. Wait, I'm just saying it's ridiculous for you to take that's like, let's debate on what should we do differently going forward. Like, people should stop murdering each other. Okay, that's illegal. What is your prescription there? Like, foreign entities aren't allowed to lobby or bribe the government. So I don't know what you mean when you say, like, do you think that we're pro foreign nations lobbying the government in an illegal manner?
They legally are, and I'll give you the process for exactly how they legally are able to do this.
Yeah, tell us.
What happens is we send over billions, or to the tune of trillions of dollars in foreign aid over X amount of time to various nations. Those various nations will trickle that down to corporations, where perhaps there will be some board member who happens to be related to some politician here. They get a nice big fat cut of that. The politician here domestically doesn't give a shit. Why would they give a shit? It's not their money. This happens frequently and all the time. One example of that would have been Hunter Biden, for instance.
Okay, but
hold on, wait. How did Hunter Biden influence? Hunter Biden isn't president. Hunter Biden isn't.
And then I'll kick it back.
Okay.
So what I'm saying to you specifically is that this happens all the time, and you have to literally have your head stuck in the fucking ground like an ostrich to pretend it doesn't.
You can't just assert without evidence massive
I gave
claims.
you an example.
What legislation did Hunter Biden influence?
What's that?
What legislation or laws did Hunter Biden influence?
Well, Joe Biden is the president of the United States, his father. What the hell are you talking about?
Okay. I don't know if you think what the hell are you talking about as a response. Let me try one more time.
Okay,
what
so
legislation? No, hold on. Because you clearly didn't hear my question. If you thought that the correct answer was what the hell are you talking about? My question is, what legislation or laws is Hunter Biden influencing?
Okay, so if he got a kickback and a portion of that went to Uncle Joe, okay, do you think that would in some way maybe incentivize Joe Biden to pass legislation that would be good, or do some type of favor that would be good for this foreign body?
Okay, it's 6 o'clock where I'm at. So if you're trying to tell me a bedtime story, you need to wait like 3 hours. I'm asking you specifically.
I just gave you a specific example.
No, you're telling me a hypothetical story that may or may not happen in the future, saying he might have gotten a kickback. So maybe Joe and
he was on the board. He was on the board.
So then tell me. So I already know that all of this is false, but I'm going to assume we'll even let this be true. I'm asking you, what did Joe Biden do because of Hunter Biden? Tell me what he did. Don't say maybe he could do that.
He fired a special prosecutor.
That special prosecutor that the entirety of the UN was calling for being fired, irregardless.
I thought you were granting the premise. So if you're granting the premise, let me finish with you granting the premise.
Well, if we're going to go into specifics, obviously I'm not going to grant you this big a piece of misinformation.
Well,
right?
Then don't say I'm going to grant you the premise, and then while you grant the premise and I try to explain it under the granted premise.
I granted you the premise when you were being general.
No.
I granted you the premise when you were being general, but if you want to be specific, then we could talk about. Do you want to talk about specifically?
Well, how am I going to answer the question specifically?
Well, that's my argument. You can't answer the question specifically because you have no answer. There is no answer.
I'm giving you the answer in real time.
So you believe that.
And by the way, everybody knows Destiny, right? Everybody knows that this is going on. This is a very common
These aren't arguments. Why are you wasting your talking time just saying like, well, everybody knows. Well, everybody knows. That's not an argument. I gave you a specific example. So what you want to do now, even though you granted the premise and said, go ahead, I'm going to grant the premise, explain it, and I tried. Now you want to cut me off so that we can get in specifics and you can debunk it. But it did happen. If you grant the premise that it did happen, then you should be able to grant the premise that it is happening. Do we want to get into a conversation about Burisma and the prosecutor that was fired? Do you think that Biden unilaterally fired him? Do you think that he's the one that tipped the scales on that fire?
He was literally bragging about doing it.
You didn't answer my question. I'm asking you, do you think that Biden...
Yeah, do I think that if he said we're going to hold up foreign aid to come to this nation until you fire this prosecutor, if that tipped the scales? Fuck yeah, I think it did.
Okay, that's huge. Can you show me where Biden was withholding foreign aid to fire that prosecutor? Or are you mixing him up with Trump?
I can show you a video of him bragging that he literally, and you can watch Hunter Avallone get pinned down by Tim Pool on this if you'd like. A video.
I don't care what Hunter Avallone.
Well, let me finish. This is literally what happened. He's caught on film bragging about the fact that he said he was going to call Barack Obama and hold up aid to this nation until that prosecutor was fired. And he said, lo and behold, they were fired, and then they got the foreign aid.
So why is it that everybody in Ukraine says that this didn't happen?
Are you saying that what I just said didn't happen?
Everybody in Ukraine?
So the literal deputy prosecutor, the one that was working afterwards, literally said there was no pressure from the United States for that firing. And like, you can laugh, but the idea that I just want to puzzle for the audience. I just want to puzzle for the audience, for people that like are maybe missing the picture. You're trying to say that in the United States of America, Joe Biden unilaterally crossed the ocean and got a deputy prosecutor fired in another country because his son got a bribe, and nobody looked at that? No other country looked at that? Nobody looked at it. Really? Why didn't that come up then until Trump was president? Why did that wait until he was under fire for Ukrainian stuff? Why did it take so long?
Corrupt as shit. That's why.
That's not a real answer. It is a real answer. It's not a real answer.
I have a video evidence of Joe Biden bragging about this. You've seen the clip yourself. Don't feign ignorance. You know he did. You know he bragged.
You have a video of Joe Biden saying, I received money in order to fire that prosecutor.
Don't mischaracterize what I'm saying. You know,
what are you saying?
What I'm saying is that Joe Biden literally is on video saying this. He said, I'm going to hold up foreign aid coming to this nation until this prosecutor is fired. Okay. And he says, lo and behold, the prosecutor is fired. They get the foreign aid. Now the foreign aid comes in, Burisma gets a chunk of it. Suddenly Hunter Biden gets a massive chunk of it too. This is not hard. We all fucking know what happened. And we know that this kind of shit happens all the time. I feel like you have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand to pretend that it doesn't.
Well, I mean, I just have like the entire Ukrainian prosecution system that have consistently said that there was zero evidence that Biden moved to get anybody dismissed. That just seems to be the. I mean, you might have a video of.
I have Biden's own words, and we know how much Hunter was paid.
Well, holy fuck, man! You should just email them the link to the YouTube video. It sounds like you would have helped them a whole lot.
Right. So, like, what exactly is like because they didn't act on it doesn't mean it's not true. But the evidence shows the evidence is pretty fucking compelling. I got to tell you,
there is no compelling evidence because if there was, then there'd be more people than just fucking randos in the alternative media talking about it.
What's the alternative media? You mean conservative media?
I didn't say conservative media. I said randos on YouTube and Twitch.
Okay. Anyway,
you guys, just to try to pull this back a little bit.
What it sounds like you're complaining about here, right? This kind of foreign involvement in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. First of all, lobbyists who lobby on behalf of foreign entities in the United States are registered. In fact, they're uniquely registered. Lobbyists are generally registered, state and federal, but foreign lobbyists, people who lobby on behalf of foreign governments, get extra steps for registration. So first of all, like it does happen that there's some lobbying, which is very different, of course, from a bribe.
I thought it was all legal.
But it's very different. Lobbying is a legitimate activity. People making a case before politicians and political forums, right? That's something that we have public information about that is all publicly tracked. That's very different than the accusation that people are trading bribes.
Right? So that's one thing. Like Destiny
that's
said
one thing.
That it was?
That's one thing. No. What you're talking about with Destiny here in Ukraine is something entirely different.
No, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, is it legal for foreign governments to lobby our government? You just said it was.
Foreign governments can engage
foreign corporations do it.
Foreign corporation, of course, but the idea that like that's incorrect.
We're against that.
No, because you guys were arguing something very different. You were arguing about some kind of illegal activity involving Joe Biden, but the idea that like foreign governments here, like let's see here.
He said it was illegal for them to do that, and it turns out that Bastiat, the lawyer, is saying, "Well, no, it's not illegal for them to do that."
Oh, look, I mean,
wait. If you want to shift your entire argument from people illegally do backdoor shady cash dumps to relatives of politicians in order to get foreign aid held up to get legislative changes done, if you want to change that to foreign companies are allowed to register a domestic.
These
These are two totally different things.
They're totally
They
different.
could be
Both
totally different
companies-
things that are completely
both
intertwined.
A foreign government lobbying in the United States means that, in effect, what that has happened is that government or the foreign corporation or whatever has hired some American attorneys to go use their contacts in Congress or wherever to try and make the case for them. All the countries in the world do this, as you might imagine, given that the United States is such an influential and powerful country. But that's something that is, one, recorded, it's legal, it's entirely public, and we can make policy determinations as to how effective it is and vote accordingly, the same way we do with lobbying in this country.
Right. So
it's also interesting, though, that you mentioned things like foreign aid and this lobbying, because so much of this is just sort of the kind of nationalistic policy you want with extra steps. So, for example, when we give billions in military aid to Egypt and Israel, who get the lion's share of foreign aid and is primarily military in nature every year, they then turn around and spend most of that money buying equipment, military equipment from the United States. In essence, it's a kind of domestic handout that has the added benefit of achieving some foreign relations goal with these host countries. But like, it's as opposed to what you're, I suppose, arguing for here, which would be maybe some kind of domestic subsidy for these companies. Instead of going through and giving it to this country to buy weapons from us, we might, instead have tariffs or some kind of subsidy for domestic corporations. I mean, at the end, the United States doesn't give this money away for charity reasons. It gives it away because it thinks it's going to achieve a foreign policy goal, and also because it wants to support American corporations who end up selling the money or selling the goods that are traded for the money.
He just made our whole argument for us.
No, I didn't. Your argument is very different. Your argument is basically what goes on now is globalist nonsense, right? It comes at the expense of the average American. What I'm saying is, no,
why should
what goes on right now,
paying for Egypt and Israel to manufacture weapons and have wars?
What goes on right now is done in the interest of the United States. You may disagree with that notion. You may disagree, for example, that it's the interest of the United States to have peace in the Middle East at a relative bargain. You may disagree that it's a worthwhile goal of the United States to have peace in a major oil-producing region of the world, a fulcrum of the global economy. You may think that's a bad investment. Well, it's a very reasonable argument that is a very good investment for Americans, and that is an investment made on behalf of the American people.
How's that worked out for the last 20 years, Bastiat?
Peace in the sense of avoiding a general conflict between two major nations. What goes on in the Middle East now compared to what went on in the past, the 6-Day War, the invasion of Israel, these wars between Israel and the Arab states went almost nuclear several times when the Soviet Union threatened to get involved. What we do is effectively subsidize our arms producers with this foreign aid, and also, as a side effect, get peace in the Middle East. I mean, that's American interest 101.
Trillions of dollars, 20 years, hundreds of thousands of lives. Yeah, it's working out great for us.
If you're saying like policy could be better, then sure, policy can always be better. But the idea that this is done in some shady fashion to take advantage of Americans on behalf of some global elite that is taking our sovereignty, that is baseless. This is maybe you have a different notion of what's good for America, but that doesn't mean that this isn't something done in the American interest.
Why would we ever think for a second that if foreign governments and corporations could lobby our government, who has access to our own trough, that they would make deals where they could send lots and lots of money to those foreign nations, which could then trickle down to their corporations and give kickbacks to politicians that are here.
The problem is that
their political career completely broke and end up multi-millionaires by the time their political career is done.
If
this
stuff
is not
like
shocking
this,
to anybody.
The thing is, if stuff like this happens, nobody on our side supports it. Nobody supports that level of corruption. But the fact of the matter,
you put your head in the fucking sand, and pretend it's not even going on.
Put your head in the sand. We just don't read fucking news by fucking Alex Jones trying to prove that Hunter Biden kickbacks are doing. I mean, you're the one that's asserting the conspiracy.
You're the one who said there was no law. You said that it was illegal for foreign governments, corporations to do this, and you were wrong, period.
Your initial word, Big Papa Fash, was bribe. You can go back and watch the VOD if you want. It is illegal to bribe. What do you think
it might be an illegal bribe, but it's still a damn bribe.
It is a very different thing to pay a lawyer to represent you than to pay a politician to do what you want. That is a very different expense.
Do you think if I donate $5,000 to Bernie Sanders' campaign and then send him an email and say, hey, we should chat sometime, and he decides to meet me for a chat, is that a bribe?
It depends on what your motivation is for it.
My motivation might be to get an audience because I want him to hear my issues and things that I want fixed as an American. Is that a bribe?
No, that probably wouldn't be considered a bribe.
So
But
you're
if
saying that
doing
entities
it, if you're doing it for nefarious purposes,
what does
I would
nefarious
consider
mean?
it a
What if I
bribe.
want to talk to Bernie Sanders about having open borders? Would you consider that nefarious?
No, I wouldn't consider that domestically nefarious. But
So
if you're
if me
a
and a
foreign
ton of
body,
people-
if you're a foreign body and your entire position here is that you're going to lobby our own government in order to get some kind of kickback to your country,
You keep
and then
saying-
you're going to give kickbacks to our politicians, yes, I would consider that bribery.
What you're
even if it was
talking
legal.
about, what you're talking about is just different. Okay, you need to stay on one topic. Okay,
This is the topic.
No, hold on. It's not, because you're jumping between these topics so unbelievably quickly. It's hard to even keep track of you. So, are you talking about like political? Are you okay? Am I debating Demon Mama right now? Did you pick up habits from her in your last debate? You can go. You can do that.
What? We're literally,
Listen, I am
been
incredibly
engaging on the
patient.
same topic for 30 minutes.
It's
or
not
so
the same
with
topic.
Bastiat.
I will repeat myself as many times as you need me to. I don't know if you think you're wearing me down with that. Okay, you smoke like 12 cigarettes here, so it seems like you're getting more stressed out than I am. Okay, so slow down.
I smoke every day.
My question is, okay, I'm starting to see why, is when you talk about lobbying, it feels like I've gotten several different definitions from you, whether
man.
that's
We're going to redefine it. We don't know what lobbying is, right, Destiny? We got to redefine everything.
So giving kickbacks to politicians to influence legislation in an unaccounted for manner, that's not lobbying. That's bribery, and that's illegal. So I'm just trying to, you can nod your head. I'm agreeing with you. Murder is bad. 2 + 2 is 4. I can give you more things to agree with me if you want. I'm just trying to figure out from you, because I still don't know the answer to this. What type of like lobbying do you want to be illegal? Is it any company that might be?
I want all foreign lobbying, and I even want domestic lobbying from corporate interests to our government to be off the table.
Okay, so then I don't know why we're talking about Burisma or all this stupid shit. You just want lobbying to be illegal. Why not just start with that then, instead of like trying to get the weeds?
We were discussing this premise, and it went into all of these other things. Conversations are dynamic. This is the way that they work often when we're exploring.
And I'm
each other's
dynamically
ideology.
okay. That's great. So now I'm going to dynamically move us away from this, because let's just talk about lobbying, because it sounds like as a blanket you want all lobbying to be illegal. Am I correct there, or is that
corporate lobbying domestically needs to be either heavily limited or eliminated altogether? But foreign lobbying from foreign corporations should absolutely be outlawed. Yes.
So I guess a couple of thoughts on that. One of the big advantages of a system of lobbying that is publicly recorded and publicly, available, you can see who's spending what on behalf of who and who they're meeting with and all that, is that is a better alternative to what you'd get if you really did say there's no, I guess, peaceful way for a country to advocate on behalf of its interests, before a body that will affect it, right? I mean, at that point, I guess the country's interest has not disappeared. The country still has some desire to get involved. It seems like all you're doing then is sort of incentivizing the kind of behavior that it seems like you're against, bribery, for example. If they have no legal means to try and spread influence, same with a corporation, right? If they have no legal means, if a corporation in the United States has no legal means, has no public means to push back on policies that will affect it, that doesn't mean that their interest in pushing back disappears. It just means that pushback is now hidden, it is now illicit, and it is now beyond the reach of the public and beyond the ability of the voter to take it into consideration when voting for politicians.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we should have corporate lobbying, because if we don't have corporate lobbying, then corporations are going to be nefarious entities?
There are a lot of reasons to have corporate lobbying. I mean, that's the first one that comes to mind with respect to, say, foreign governments. I mean, because foreign governments, again, are certainly willing to do all kinds of things. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, for example.
I didn't say foreign governments couldn't speak with our government. I said foreign corporations, Bastiat.
You were talking about foreign governments engaged in lobbying as well. Right, if you want to talk about foreign corporations, then it seems like the argument is even thinner, because, again, the idea that these corporations are foreign in any meaningful way, the idea that a company in the United States is American in any meaningful way. I mean,
in real time in the United States, it's pretty fucking meaningful.
No, what do you think that a corporation that exists in the United States that has the same economic interest as a corporation that exists overseas, if we're assuming the economic interest is the same, is going to make a different decision based purely on patriotic sentiment? I mean, they're still accountable to shareholders. It could, sure, but there's no reason to imagine that. Corporations in the United States have done all kinds of antisocial things.
Why do I want Chinese corporations to lobby my government, Bastiat? Why do I think that's a great idea?
Look, the idea that Chinese corporations are really going to be asking for different things is perhaps something based on the fact that that country's government is involved with those corporations, right? Which is another change. If you're saying that, for example, well, if we've got a country, China, that puts extreme political pressure on its corporations and uses them as a Trojan horse to achieve all kinds of political objectives, and as a result of this, new Cold War, maybe we need to have a different strategy with that country's corporations. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's an argument for that, but you're not arguing for that. You're arguing for the end of all foreign lobbying, or all lobbying by all foreign corporations. Presumably even Canadian companies, Mexican companies, British companies. I mean, at the end of the day, these companies largely, outside of special cases like, for example, Communist Party of China, have the same interests economically as corporations here in the United States. I mean, capital is not something that whose interests change based on the citizenship of the people who wield it. I mean, do you disagree with that? Do you think that American corporations are somehow, they're more patriotically inclined? They do things on behalf of citizens more often?
I think that having foreign corporations able to lobby our government is extraordinarily bad, because it's not in the people's interest to do that.
So what it seems like you're advocating for is something that actually works against the interests of the people, because, for example, with the interests, or the example I talked about in Canada, that's very tangible. And I mean, there are all kinds of similar examples of this in different industries. Those foreign corporations are prevented from doing certain kind of business in the telecom market up there, right? The domestic corporations benefit, sure, but that comes at the expense of the people. Whereas if you're in the United States,
how does it come at the expense of the people?
Because they are limited in their choices, and as a result have to pay more for the same service than they otherwise would if they had more choices, if they had more competition. And what you're saying is those foreigners should not be able to come in and say, hey, we want to compete, we want to provide services to people in your country, right? I mean, and that just doesn't, it's something that you use the word
do you consider the Canadian government?
In reality, you're advocating for things that work against the interests of
Do you consider the Canadian government to be corrupt?
No, I mean, no more than anybody else, I guess.
Do you consider the Chinese government to be corrupt?
I know it's a different kind of deal. It's like the Soviet Union. It's certainly corrupt. It's certainly corrupt, but the big interest you're focused on is their interests against the United States, presumably, not just that they're corrupt.
Are they a corrupt government in China?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So the thing is that maybe it would be a good idea to limit corrupt governments who have corporate interests from lobbying our government, right?
Why?
I just explained.
Just because they're corrupt, right?
Yes, because they're corrupt. That's a great reason.
Look, there's corruption in all kinds of different countries. Obviously, some countries have more, but the idea that ipso facto, the fact that there's some corruption in this country means that therefore it is always wrong for anybody to try and seek an audience before the most powerful legislative body in the world, and that we should drive all that stuff underground. I mean, that doesn't make sense. If you want to say, hey, you know what, maybe we should have a law that says, if your company that you're lobbying on behalf of is engaged in some violation of, some corrupt practices or whatever, yeah, sure, okay, maybe. But again, this is just a blanket ban. And again, it's not just China that you're talking about, because I even left room to say, okay, hey, you want to target it to that? Okay, you're saying all of it. Not just China, not just the bad guys, but Canada too.
I don't want corporate interests to lobby my government. Even our founders were very skeptical of that, Bastiat, and you know that this is true.
That's true, that some of them were skeptical of corporate lobbying. Some of those same folks, like Thomas Jefferson, were also very big on all kinds of other things we wouldn't support today, like an agrarian economy built on the back of slavery. So it doesn't mean that they're infallible.
It's not like slavery, Bastiat.
No, I'm not saying it's like slavery. I'm saying, though, that the founding fathers were great people who we are very fortunate as a country to have a sort of intellectual inheritance from, that we can draw upon to this day. But the idea that they were infallible, that they said this and therefore
I didn't say that they were infallible, but there was a lot of issues that come up when you allow for foreign corporations to lobby our government here domestically. What are they lobbying for? Their interests, right?
I think let's take a deep breath and back up. So I think the reason why people like the ability of corporations and other countries to be able to get an audience with the government, especially through international trading bodies, is because sometimes governments can exercise, policies that you would approve of that are protective of their domestic organizations. So this is something that I learned the hard way a long time ago when I got ripped off by a company. If you get fucked by a company in another country, you flying to that country to represent yourself in court against that country or against that company oftentimes might not work out the best for you because they don't give a fuck about you. You're a foreign entity. Fuck you. If they're probably the judge, every part of the prosecution, defense, every part of that is going to look more favorably on their local interests. It might also be the case that you have governments that are practicing in such ways that they are favoring their domestic companies by specifically crafting laws for or against certain things that make your domestic companies that are trying to compete in their markets non-competitive. I think, or maybe you disagree, but in cases where we're trying to export goods and services to other countries, if there are countries that are crafting legislation that is making our corporations non-competitive in their markets, we probably want to have some way by which we either appeal to their government or appeal to some third-party arbitration like the WTO in order to lift those types of trading restrictions. Or we can do it through things like NAFTA.
Sure. So having direct government contact for two governments to negotiate things like trade deals, stuff like that's what our government is designed to do. There's a big difference between that and allowing foreign corporate lobbyists to directly come to our country and lobby our politicians for whatever their purposes are.
I think in the cases of, I'm pretty sure, because we're getting super in the weeds on this, and I can't speak for Bastiat, but I'm pretty sure that both of us are probably against the idea that a foreign anything, corporation or entity, comes to our country and bribes a politician to get some piece of legislation passed. But when it comes to companies that have
as long as it's legal.
Well, because
you don't see that as a bribe.
I don't think you're saying
when we're talking about lobbying, the reason why the lobbying conversation is so difficult is there's so many different types of lobbying. Let's say, for instance,
talking about corporate lobbying.
Sure, but what lobbying is complicated. If anything, the Citizens United decision showed us that lobbying and what lobbying is very complicated. So, for example, let's say that the government wanted to crack down on social media, and they wanted to say, "Hey, we're going to start limiting, every single person to 1 hour a day of social media time." It might be the case that there is a domestic registered corporation that has a foreign entity, like say TikTok. I don't know if they're still foreign owned or if a U.S. corp bought that because of the Trump pressure. But it might be the case that TikTok in the U.S.-based version of it has an interest in that not being the case. So maybe TikTok, Facebook, Amazon, whatever other social media companies join up and they start funding advertisements saying hey, vote whatever on prop whatever because you should protect social media. In that case, you have it's kind of a foreign entity, but they have a domestic registered agent that has a real business interest that hires U.S. citizens, has U.S. workers, has U.S. presence, and they may want to feel like they want to advertise in favor of a particular policy. I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing, but I guess we can argue back and forth on that. I just want to be clear that that's way different than a foreign person bribing a U.S. politician to get a law passed.
It still sounds like it's a form of bribery to me, just legal bribery, which you don't consider to be bribery.
Well, but then my question earlier was that let's say that I have what if I hold a dinner for a politician where I get a bunch of donors to just talk to them about an issue that we feel are important? Is that bribery to you?
It would depend on the context, but I think it could be construed as being bribery. But when you're talking about direct citizenry being able to talk directly to their politicians, that's probably okay. When we're talking about corporate interests, that's a whole different ballgame.
Well, but that's kind of where the line gets really blurry. And this is why the Citizens United decision was so difficult and why it's also incredibly blurry. Let's say, for instance, let's say that I work in a bottling plant in the Midwest, and I'm really worried that Biden is going to enact some piece of legislation related to green energy or something that's going to fuck our company over. We're not going to be able to afford to ship our products anymore. Would it be bad if our company hosted a dinner where we brought, if you're a verified donor or whatever, $1,000, you come to this dinner and then you have a chance to get an audience with the president or some politician to talk about these things? Would that be considered undue corporate lobbying to you? Or
probably, probably. But let's just grant it to you that it wouldn't be. What we're mostly talking about here is foreign lobbying, not domestic lobbying. We're talking about foreign corporations being able to do exactly what you just described. And that is what I ascribe to as being bad.
Sure. And I'm not going to say that because you granted me, I'm going to say you grant every other part of my argument. I'm not going to scream at you there. But I'm just saying that if that same situation set up, but instead it was a car dealership that sells Volkswagen or Toyota cars, right? Well, now is this foreign lobbying?
No, it's not foreign lobbying.
Okay. So as long as they have
tell me why it would be foreign lobbying. Because they bought a foreign product and are reselling it.
Well, at this point, the lines are getting so blurred.
No, they're not they're not getting so. So flesh out the hypothetical.
Well, the hypothetical fleshed out could be
by a foreign Are they owned by a foreign entity, or is this a domestic corporation that has bought Volkswagens for the purposes of reselling them?
Foreign entities can domesticate corporations and have
I
holding
get
corps in
that,
the
and
United States.
that's problematic when they can lobby. That's my whole point.
Yeah. So what if it was okay?
Guys, just for I've been super patient, and I hate to interrupt your big dick measuring, cock waving contest that you guys, all three of you, have going on. But I'm getting a little bored, to be honest, because
And we are going to actually go to the Q&A portion in a minute. So if you guys want to kind of.
So let me just say my little piece here to kind of wrap this up, because I was actually really disappointed in this whole conversation because we got off into all kinds of weeds and details and we missed the broader point. So maybe as a mother, I can kind of put this together for you guys how I think of this. So my oldest daughter is 20 years old now. I remember specifically when she was a little tiny baby and 9/11 happened and we started all this foreign wars shit, being worried about, what was going to happen and how things were going to pan out. 20 fucking years later, we're still in the Middle East. We still can't get out of, Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we're invading places like Libya or Syria. We're toppling dictators. We are installing puppet regimes. I mean, half of these people we installed as puppet regimes in the first place, like Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was CIA guy that we put in. Same thing with Mao. What we're talking about when we're talking about nationalism, at least for me, it's stuff like, I haven't seen a very good increase in wages here in my rural Midwestern area in 20 fucking years. From the time my daughter was an infant to now, everything here has crumbled and fallen apart. The places where people used to be able to work and make great money got destroyed by NAFTA. We've had broadly globalist policy, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican in charge. I hate the GOP. I hate them with a burning, fiery passion. There is no representation in this government anymore for a Christian conservative family person like me anymore. And it's because all of the people in our government are more interested in serving the interests of corporations and places like the UN or the WHO or whatever other, groups are meeting in Davos to, dictate to the managerial class of the world how we're going to run everything. There is no future for my kids and my grandkids if I can't get that shit under control. We haven't had good wages. We've had people fighting wars that, before my daughter was born to now. We're still over there. Why? This is because no matter who is in office, whether it's Bush or Clinton or Trump or Biden. The Trump administration was a huge disappointment to me. This stuff did not get fixed. And it's because you see all this bullshit, this global citizen bullshit, this interconnected world. We're all one, everything's the same. And I've heard Destiny say on his streams that, he doesn't give a shit about patriotism. He doesn't give a shit about nations, culture, none of that shit. It's all nonsense to him. But he'll grant that, probably other people should be patriotic because it'll probably keep things a little more cohesive and make it a little better. What I'm trying to talk about, and we got off into all these silly tangents about, Burisma and all this other nonsense. I'm saying, where is the representation? If this is supposed to be a representative republic, where's my representation? Where's the representation for my children? All I see is these huge technocrats, these globalist overlords, just dictating to us from these giant think tanks, from these groups of elites who get together and decide for us what will be dictated, and what is presented to us as a democratic republic barely exists.
I do think that Mao would have been a great CIA agent, given that he killed a lot of communists. But otherwise,
in terms of issues you have, you can give two pieces of advice to your daughter and it fixes every problem you have. One, go to college and don't join the military. The idea that foreign wars are having this hugely negative impact on your day-to-day life. I mean, unless you literally have family that are deployed and dying overseas, this is not having a direct day-to-day impact on you. Not to defend it. I think most of it at this point are pretty sick of all of the stuff going on in the Middle East. Number one. Number two, if you wanted to work a high-paying job, tell her to go to college. You go to college, get a degree, you get a really good paying job. That's where all of the productivity
that women hold the majority of college debt in this country, and that the average debt for a woman is like 65 grand, and then they hit 30 and decide they want to stay home with kids? How's that going to help my daughters?
The average, tell
my
her not to
daughters need a family wage. They need a family wage where their husband can make enough money that they can stay home and raise their kids. We haven't had that for 40 years.
Women hold the majority of the debt because women are, one, graduating from college more than men are, and two, because women oftentimes go for higher paying degrees, especially graduate paying degrees, especially in areas that don't pay as much, which causes them to take a little bit longer to pay the debt back. If you want your daughter to go to school and not have as much debt, just tell her to pick a high paying major. There's plenty of them out there. If you want to make money,
for women who want families,
for women that want families, then go find a husband that makes a lot of money. What do you mean? You can still do that. They're still out there.
I think there's something, I think, to what you're saying, but I think it's you're sort of what you're saying then kind of is going to the wrong conclusions. So one, just to be clear, I absolutely agree with Destiny that the troops are having very little impact domestically. Perhaps some of that money spent on these wars could be, distributed here in some fashion, but it's not the defense. The defense budget is a relatively small part of the overall budget, even at its massive size. And something else that's worth considering is that America's overseas footprint has been declining now for decades in terms of number of soldiers and in terms of the amount of money that costs to sustain this. I mean, so it's not. I think the Americans have been, since the end of the Cold War, gradually losing interest in the rest of the world militarily, and that's. I think that's going to be a problem, but it is nevertheless, when you look at those number of troops,
helped my kids when it has replaced the economy with a service economy.
So
we no longer have manufacturing.
Here's what we can talk about with NAFTA, and here's what we can talk about with the economy generally. All right, what you're talking about are some policy problems as a result of a free trade agreement that left more people richer than they otherwise would have been. It is important to remember, though, and this is why NAFTA, this was the problem with NAFTA, was that there was very little provision made for the people who didn't win as a result of free trade, because some people didn't win as a result of free trade. The country as a whole, much richer, more people have more access to more goods and more affordable prices, but it would have been a good idea to supplement this
which people won?
With more people, more Americans,
people that buy car, every single U.S. citizen that buys a car wins from things like NAFTA. NAFTA was so good that even when Trump updated it with his own USMCA, it was basically the same fucking agreement with a couple of the percentages toggled. You can go and you can read any economist analysis on things that related to NAFTA. NAFTA was a winner for all three countries that it were involved, with different industries benefiting and different industries not benefiting. For people that are complaining about the idea that manufacturing has gone, I'm sorry, but unless you want to go back 50 years, you're never going to find the $60 an hour union manufacturing jobs. They don't exist anymore. We don't build cars like that anymore.
They were coming back.
Nobody does. They weren't coming back. You're lying.
We were watching it in real time.
I'm sorry, but the only way
trip and not fall into a job.
That is absolutely not. First of all, into a job, sure, but not the types of union-protected manufacturing.
Well, how does that start? How does that start? That started because an abundance of jobs.
No, it started. The reason why those jobs are gone is because the world moves on. It's because technology changes. It's because a guy with a fucking hammer banging a door onto a car is not going to make as much money in 2021, where a robot can do that 50 times more efficiently than any individual worker can. Those jobs are never coming back. If you want your children to be ready,
who fixes and services the robots?
People that go to school and get a college degree, like what I said your daughter should do. Yes. I'm sorry. Wait, do you think Mexican illegal immigrants
are for the most part not college educated, and they're the ones fixing the robots? You're incorrect on that.
I'm sorry. Do you think the people servicing the robots and assembly lines are people with high school degrees?
Yes, because that's what BPF does for a living, just so you know. Hate to dox him, but that's what he does with his high school degree.
Who do you think builds the robots?
I build the fucking robots.
I'm telling you that you don't. I'm sorry.
I'm telling you I do.
You can pretend that. You can pretend that.
What's a servo?
You can pretend all you want that you're the. I'm not going to sit here and play 20 questions with whatever imaginary job you have. But you are not the
imaginary job.
You are not the person that is responsible at the end of the day. You might open the box and put the Legos together, but the person that actually designs the schematics, the person that actually programs the machines, is not you, because you wouldn't be doing that.
It is.
Okay. I just want you to know that my last job training was actually building those robots, and I know what you guys do, and I know that we did everything all the robots, every robot, all the kinds of robots.
What kind?
All of them.
Specifically?
Every single one.
All of
what
them.
does that mean?
Every robot.
single one.
What do you mean? What does it mean? We
That
built
means
all the
what
robots.
specific
We built all the
robots were you
robots,
building?
and then we sent them to you guys,
built
and then
all
you
the
guys put
fucking
all
robots
of them.
of the
Yep.
world, huh?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
We made a
got
shop. It was called Robot IKEA, and then you guys like you go to the shop and you buy the boxes and then you put them together, and then you pretend that you're the ones that made the machine.
You just
Gotcha.
got caught.
So-
You just got caught and you're mad.
So
I pretend that I got caught all day long, but there is a reason why those manufacturing jobs are never coming back. There is a reason why they don't exist the way that they do today, like they did in the past. You can try to complain or talk about whatever jobs you want, but that is just a fact of life that happens all over the world. Even in China, where they have some of the cheapest, widest labor available, those jobs are being automated. So if you want to pretend that like random people on the street can put together these machines and there's jobs available for everybody to
They
do it,
can,
that's
and if
fine.
you want, you
but
just said
that's not
you
the
just
case.
said that they could. You just said that random people could just put these robots together right out of the fucking box, right?
Only if they go to the Robot IKEA store.
Hey, Brittany,
So-
can I finish answering?
yeah, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A because we have a whole nother topic to do.
So I want to say that there are losses as a result of international trade agreements. That doesn't mean that they don't come close to outweighing the benefits that the United States accrued from those trade agreements in terms of the number of people who benefited and the financial benefit. But it's important to remember that the fact that we didn't implement a policy in an ideal fashion by providing enough of a cushion, we didn't have enough, say, trade adjustment insurance, to deal with the fallout, right? That doesn't mean that the trade agreement was bad for America. I mean, it was still something that was done in the interest of America. The reason I think it's so important to take care of people who fall through these kinds of situations, who don't win out on net, is so that we have a society where everybody has the material well-being to be able to recognize that this is a policy that benefits the whole country. But at the end of the day, if you're worried about the future for your daughter, I mean, there are a lot of good things we need to do in this country. There are a lot of problems we need to fix. Wages have gone up in the last few decades, for example. But a lot of those gains that might otherwise have gone to wages have been eaten up by things like rapidly rising healthcare costs as a result of technological advantage and broken regulatory private-public system in the United States. Housing costs have gone up in large part because of absolutely restrictive building regulations that make it very difficult to build new homes.
Corporations like BlackRock buying up residential housing at 20 to 30% over what they're asking.
Right. So here's the classic nationalist problem, right? You look at BlackRock engaging in reasonable economic activity, which is to say buying a worthwhile asset, and you conclude that there's a fixed pie. There are only so many homes in the United States, right? And to the extent that we aren't building enough homes, it's because there are rules in place that make it too difficult legally or financially to build new homes.
Can affect markets?
They affect markets. They affect markets by creating or by buying up homes and making it clear that if you build homes, you'll have somebody who will buy that home.
So when BlackRock buys up residential properties at 30% over asking price, you don't think that's a foreign entity manipulating our housing market?
Here's the thing. I'm saying that's only a problem to the extent we artificially restrict the size of our housing supply. So if you're really concerned, for example, about the ability of your daughter to find affordable housing, to have a nice life, well, then instead of taking it, to a corporation under this argument that there are only so many houses in the United States, right? There's only so many resources and we have to divide them up, right? You just have to look at the history of this country. When, before we had these restrictions, housing was much more widely available. It was much easier to build. You could build more densely. You could you could have growth and still have affordable housing. And to the extent we've got away from that, that's a bad thing, but that isn't the result of foreign interest. That's the result of your neighbor down the street, for example, who wants a rule in place to maintain the value of their house because they've decided that that's what they're gonna base their retirement on, right? That's a policy problem, though. That's not some globalist nationalist thing.
Bastiat, I guess we're closing this segment down. We got to give you guys the last word, so we give you guys the last word here.
Okay,
and then get in the Q&A, I guess.
We're going to do the Q&A, and then you guys will have closing statements, and then we'll take a 3-minute break before the second topic. So I'm just going to go on to the Q&A, sorry. Okay, so from Eric Pone, how is it possible to have common culture when the urban-rural balkanization is real?
I mean, we've had an urban-rural divide in this country for a very long time. Our particular brand of federalism was designed in part in response to the idea, the fear that large coastal cities would dominate and and that the rural areas would be underrepresented in government. So we've always had that kind of dispute. I don't think, though, that that's a form of balkanization. We don't think enough about how our rural-urban divide shows itself politically. We get too often distracted with this whole red state, blue state argument. But I mean, I don't. The idea that we don't have a common culture when we consume the same media, we have the same internet, we mostly have the same language. I mean, there's a lot of cultural diversity in the United States, but I just don't know how you could really, with a straight face, argue that we've got any kind of meaningful cultural balkanization. That is to say, division of one country, the former Yugoslavia, into several smaller countries that then fought each other in a war.
Meanwhile, the rural living people are having a live debate with the people who are cosmopolitan. Yes, there's a massive divide.
Yeah. I've been
I live in a
saying that
rural
for
area.
12 years online, that I think that it's the rural versus urban problem that's the biggest one in this nation. And it's what tended to make me agree with Vox Day when he said way back in 2003 that he thought eventually the country was going to split up, especially if you add on top of that mass immigration. So the entire southwest of the nation is going to be basically some kind of Latino, Spanish-speaking kind of sub-nation at some point. That's going to happen. It's already happening. That's only going to increase. And if you don't have something like nationalist populism, there will at some point be a breakup. I don't know how that'll work out. I don't know what form it will take or how it will exactly happen, but that's what I think will happen.
That is, just to be clear, not happening. The idea that there's a Spanish-speaking minority that is going to, or a majority that is rising, is going to break away.
Hispanic, Spanish.
To be clear, the fact that these people are Hispanic doesn't mean that they're not American or that they have some.
Bastiat, we have a lot of questions, right. So let's not go too much on each one, you guys. And also for those in the chat, we will open the Q&A. Like right now, the questions are closed off. If you want to have your question read, it would need to be a super chat. We'll reopen the Q&A during the next topic. So, all right. So from Tyler Durden, let's see Destiny and Mio debate. Give the people what they want. And actually, Destiny, I'm going to talk to you about that later. Okay. So from Reckoning, nationalism arises to secure one's material interests. It forms when a group negates stronger towards an outgroup versus internally. Why not unite the whole world? Because space and resources are a zero-sum game.
Whoa,
is that a question or?
Yeah, it just sounded like a statement.
All right. All right, these are super
CTV
chats.
would say anybody can apply for statehood.
Nice.
Okay. So from Tyler Durden, nationalism seems like a slippery slope. How can we implement nationalism without devolving into an authoritarian regime like Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia?
One of the easiest ways to defeat hyper-nationalistic arguments, and I think it's kind of been demonstrated here, unfortunately, is that anytime people want to push for this hardcore nationalism, when you start asking, like, okay, well, what would you do? Like, it's hard to get like any actual policies. Like, and it's the same with whether you're talking about commies on the far left or whether you're talking about Nazis or fascists on the far right. Like, okay, you want to make this world, well, what do you want to do to get there? And like, actually getting some form of like law or policy or prescription is so fucking hard to do it. Yeah.
It's okay. So my answer to that is no, it's not hard to do. And nationalism has been essentially the status quo in this country since its inception. So that just seems like it's so absurd to me. If you can't answer every single micro question that might come up, that doesn't negate the nationalist argument. Right now, we are a nation and we do have borders and we have border control. These guys want to change that. Right. So, no, it's not like it's hard to defend this viewpoint. And we did it very effectively.
I mean, nationalism has sort of been ever present in the United States in the same way that we have often made policies that are short-sighted and in benefit of certain domestic interests at the expense of the whole. For example, our historical record on tariffs in the United States for the 19th century.
On national sovereignty.
But this idea that we've had,
point.
We've always been based on this kind of these nationalistic points that you've made here. No, the United States has been involved with the world writ large.
Yeah,
from
global trade is fine.
And
global
it was founded. It was founded based on
isolationism.
In fact, it may be the first nation. I think it's certainly the first major nation that was founded on a universalist creed, as opposed to some preservation of some defined ethno-religious group.
Okay. All right. And so from Eric Pone, will sex robots be made domestically? These are just the super chats. So
Maybe we can get to that.
these are the super
He
chats. So
makes
I'm just
all the
reading them.
sex robots, you guys. He makes all the sex robots.
All right. So
I think sex robots are probably going to be imported because most of the people that are obsessed with nationalism all seem to be super fixated on Asian women. So they're probably going to come from Japan and Korea.
we can do that one on the next topic. All right. So from Jada Lee, why do we assume we have a right to immigrate people from their home countries? Surely they should stay there and make their own countries better.
We're not forcing them to immigrate to our country. If they want to immigrate, they can do it. We're not like abducting them.
And the alternative to that, the idea that that the country has a right to this person, the person, I mean, maybe they will make a different argument, but the person should ultimately be seen as the person who decides their own destiny. They do not belong to a country in the sense of not having the ultimate freedom to travel to another one, to try their luck somewhere better. So, I mean, if you think that people are the property of, or some other, the chattel of their governments, I mean, then I suppose there's something to that, but I don't think so. People should be free to travel, make their own decisions there. It's not a question of we are hurting this country, because it's up to that individual. It is not up to the government, whether their people are free to leave, or it shouldn't be anyway.
The better policy is the neoliberal policy. Let's do brain drain and import all of their smartest, and then send them hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to keep their country stable.
So remittances are like the idea that remittance is bad literally is just based on bad understandings of macroeconomic theory. Number one. Number two, brain drain doesn't. You can say sure is all you want.
Yeah, we can have an entire debate on it.
That's the weirdest thing.
Have an entire debate on it. Literally, you can hop on fucking Google Scholar and search for brain drain. And the idea that brain drain is this demonstrated thing doesn't seem to be the case that happens. Like, people will migrate to other countries. They acquire resources and skills in those countries. A lot of times those same resources and skills make it back to the other countries.
Yeah,
this is
they
why,
should go right back.
Right.
Well, they don't. They could, or they don't have to. They could travel between both places. They can get.
That's the thing that's so weird. Is that now
they need citizenship, but we're not taught. First of all, if they're going to be so skilled that they can come to our country and contribute something, why would you want to send them back?
Right.
Other than just like being an idiot. Like, I don't understand. You'd want to keep that talent here as much as possible. Like, but that doesn't mean that their skills still can't be like an inflow and an outflow of skills and resources. You don't have to believe. You can lie if you want. Go look for brain drain on Google. The idea that it has been demonstrated.
You want to pay it twice. You just said, why do we want them to go back?
That's the bigger question. Why do you care?
Did he just make an appeal to Google argument?
No. Why do you?
I'm appealing to the research. You can go and look up the research you want on brain drain, but it just doesn't happen that simply.
Bro. Who cares? If you're nationalist, why do you care if it happens?
Fuck, I just realized because you're fucking home.
If you're nationalists, as opposed to just kind of people who are out to get immigrants for some reason, if you are nationalists and you want the country to boom and benefit, why do you care if these people traveling here has some negative effect on the home country?
Bastiat, you're paying for it twice.
How are you paying for it twice?
Because I'm explaining it to you. If you bring them here and you're taking away their best and brightest who would reform their country with better policies, and then your plan is to send millions or billions in economic foreign aid to these people, you're literally paying for this 2 times.
So firstly, the idea that they have a best and brightest that's going to develop in the same way as in another country as in the United States betrays the entire reason why they would come to the United States. They wouldn't have the same economic or educational opportunities in their country that they would in the US. That's why they come. Number one. Number two, if you want to talk about the macroeconomic theory surrounding remittances, the idea of sending currency to some country or whatever, all that currency has to find its way back to us in the form of foreign investment anyway. I can either pay G Hard or whatever the fuck, $100 to work here, or he can send $100 back to his country and they can buy products of the US that way. The USD makes its way back. Yeah, that's literally how macroecon works.
What an awesome plan. So then it can come back to us in the way of foreign lobbying to bribe our own politicians. What a great plan.
Foreign lobbying that we all agreed that if it's illegal, should stay illegal. I mean, like, if you want to pretend that it's like some guy now in fucking Cuba is shipping $2,000 to Hunter Biden so that he leaks the right dick pic to Joe Biden to get the fucking new law passed that like is favorable towards, fucking whatever's going to Cuba.
What a total straw man. Total straw man. None of that.
I just want to say I think it's super racist.
Well, we started off with the fake thing with Burisma, so I thought I'd counter with another fake story.
Not fake.
Like, Africa can't have their own universities.
Why are you doing this?
I have argued with so many people on the left that have tried to use you're the real racist argument. Please just put it to sleep, okay? We're not even going to do that one right now, okay?
Oh my God. Okay. So from Reckoning, Destiny, why do you keep ducking debates with Julie 333 on nationalism? I don't know.
I don't know who that is.
I don't either. Okay, so from Joseph for Destiny, what security measures do you think should be put in place for people to enter the country?
I don't do border security. My understanding is that there's a series of background checks and document investigations that take place. They probably cross-reference with like the UNHCR if they're refugees or other UN bodies or whatever who keeps track of those documents. I don't know what that process looks like, so I couldn't tell you in detail.
Okay, so from Cody B to Bastiat and Destiny, what do you think about religious extremism and its implementation within the U.S.? Is there any amount of fundamentalism that you'd reject?
I mean, I reject the fundamentalism that breaks law, but that would be the same for any religion. Like, it was actually interesting. Sharia law came up. I mean, there was no risk of any implementation of Sharia law in the United States, and yet several states have actively banned the practice or the use of Sharia law in government. So, like, I don't see any threat there. Obviously, to the extent somebody breaks the law and wants to commit violence or plans some kind of violent act or otherwise do something like that as a result of religious extremism, that's a problem, same as any other type of extremism. But I don't, for example, feel that we should be picking and choosing between different religions because we have some idea that some religions are more extreme than others, for example. I mean, ultimately, all that matters is that we've got equal treatment and protection and enforcement of the laws.
Okay. Did you want to answer it too, Destiny?
As long as people, I think religion is stupid, but if people want to follow the law, they can do whatever the fuck they want. I don't care. As long as they're not doing some crazy shit that breaks the law.
All right. So from Komar for BPF, because you dodged the question, are people that don't view the world through the Constitution not considered American in your view? Don't pivot to citizenship.
And I never said that they weren't. I was just giving a commonality. That's it. Because an example was asked for. It doesn't mean that it's universally applied, but I think most people tend to look through that prism. It doesn't mean that they're not American. They still have citizenship. They still have all of that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so, he's giggling like it doesn't make sense, but
I'm giggling because the guy in the dono literally said, "Don't pivot till they have citizenship," and you literally said they have citizenship. This is very funny to me. I'm sorry. I'll mute next time.
Okay. So
well, I don't know what else to say. It's just objectively true.
I think that was the point of the dono.
So from Reven. Hey, Bastiat and Destiny. Every country except those in Western Hemisphere practices nationalism. Yet we are demonized whenever we try. Curious, wonder who could be behind this. Oh, God.
There are countries that practice female genital mutilation. I don't know why I give a fuck. Like, well, other countries don't do this thing or this thing. I don't give a fuck about other countries. I just want to do what's in the best interest of my country. And right now, the United States kind of sits at the head of like the world hegemony. We write a lot of the international trade regulation. We have a huge amount of influence, thankfully, now again in the WHO or in things like the UN. And I would like the United States to continue to have a lot of influence in that. I don't give a fuck about fucking Israel protecting Jewish people, having lots of kids. I don't give a fuck about Japan keeping some ethnic homogeneity. They can do whatever the fuck they want. People in Japan are fucking killing themselves all the time. Everybody in the world fucking hates Israel. Okay, those countries can do what the fuck they want. I don't care. I just want to do what's the best for my country. I don't look to other countries to guide the United States on what our policy should be. The U.S. is supposed to be a world leader, not a follower of other countries, especially ones that are shittier than ours. No offense.
We also want what's best
Did he
for
just
our
say
country.
shithole countries?
No, that's the
We
difference.
want the same exact thing.
No, you don't.
Yes,
and it's
yes,
important
we
to
do.
recognize the difference. Destiny is advocating for policies that will make the United States a better, more successful nation, irrespective of, words, slippery words or concepts like, who's foreign and who's not foreign, right? You're taking a much more superficial level as to what is in the interest of the United States, right?
Much more
So if
specific
foreign
level.
governments are involved, if there's foreign aid, it is not in the interest of the United States, as opposed to what Destiny said. For example, NATO, right? This is an alliance of all kinds of different countries that the United States specifically formed, right? And it provides a lot of benefit to foreign countries. But at the same time, it ultimately was designed with the benefit of the United States in mind. You, on the other hand, just say, well, look, all these foreigners, what's the benefit to us? We're just protecting all these foreigners. Fuck it, And that's a superficial, look at what benefits a country.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's
We got to do the questions, guys. We're gonna
let's get through these questions and not do too much back and forth so we can get to the next topic as well. All right. So from Earthman Brick to Rachel, would you prefer Islam to communism?
That's a really weird question. It's not exactly, that's kind of a bifurcation. That's kind of like a false equivalency to ask which I would prefer. However, I would say that as a Christian nationalist, if I had a Christian nation, maybe I would take the communism, but how about neither?
Okay. From Joseph to Destiny, how does culture affect nationalism?
Well, if you have a more nationalistic culture, you're probably going to be more nationalistic. If you have a less nationalistic, that's a very broad question. I don't know how to answer that. Your culture can affect nationalism in a million different ways. I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, so from Grematu to Destiny and Bastiat, you guys don't believe in foreign lobbying. Then what the fuck is the Israeli lobby then?
I mean, I never said I don't believe that foreign lobbying exists. I was saying that actually foreign lobbying is basically it's a good thing that it's legal because foreign countries will seek to influence American politics in a variety of different ways, and it's better that we all. It's no. It is better that we know what's going on above board rather than we go back to, the world as it existed in, what you might call a more nationalistic period where instead of sending goods over borders, we sent soldiers over borders. I mean, instead of lobbying in the open, we sent spies to engage in sabotage and assassination,
we still
across
do that.
borders like that. The nations have interests and will pursue those interests irrespective of their system and irrespective of the structure that they're able to do that in. We've created through lobbying a way for people to do that publicly in a way that we can hold someone democratically accountable, and to shut that off just drives those interests underground, which is the most important reason.
Every time you say the word irrespective, your floof grows just a little bit taller on your head.
I appreciate it. I'm a short guy. I need all the floof I can get.
Also legalize everything or else black markets.
I feel like
that is an important point, but there are a lot of other reasons why people ought to be free to lobby those who have direct impact on them. But yeah, that is an important reason.
I feel like the Israel lobby stuff should be supported so much by like every side. Like us on the left would probably support lobbies for Israel because we want to have like better relationships with foreign partners, and people on the right should support it because the stronger Israel is, the more likely all the Jews leave the United States and go live there. So it sounds like a win-win from a right and left perspective, no?
Well,
right.
I wish that was how it worked, but sadly, no.
Yeah.
All right, so from Reckoning, nationalism arises to secure one's material interests. It forms when a group negates stronger against an outgroup than internally. Why not unite the world? Because space and resources are a zero-sum game.
Yeah, we already went through that.
Can I just say one little thing about this? This idea that nationalism is about securing material interests is like the idea of the German National Socialists that need to secure resources in the East because we have this very limited supply of resources, and if we don't compete for them, we don't take our living space, we will starve. Because the rest of the world will have these resources instead.
I agree that it's regime, a shallow way to look at it.
That regime was, of course, wiped out. But meanwhile, finally, after the First Reich after the Second Reich and the Third Reich. After they were gone and Germany became a much smaller but a much more economically liberal, free trading kind of country, it became the richest country in Europe and now sets policy across Europe without even wanting to. So nationalism is very much against the way that it's been practiced a lot of times, very much against the national interest.
Okay, so from Jada Lee to Destiny, if the world is open and people are the same, why do they only immigrate into the USA and Europe, only to white countries?
I never said people were the same. I don't know what the people are vastly different across the entirety of the world. In terms of why do people mainly go to like Western, or I guess they want to say white countries, probably because that's where most of the opportunity is right now.
That's not what he said earlier. He said that borders are just arbitrary lines separating people.
I could have sworn that we had a whole conversation topic earlier where me and Bastiat literally said that there probably should be some established inflow outflow of citizens. There probably should be like green cards and social security numbers. I think even your wife even said as much, that we generally agree on being
off from all that backpedaling, Destiny.
I don't understand like why this is this question doesn't really make any sense. Like, first of all, these aren't like the United States is not a white country, but even if you grant that, I mean, if people aren't immigrating to the United States because it's a white country or European countries because they're white, it's because of high incomes and economic opportunity, and for some people, political freedom as well. So it's this idea that why aren't people immigrating to countries and say a country in Africa or a country in South America? Well, one, there is immigration in the rest of the world as well, but two, it's a credit to the systems set up in these countries, the wealth in these countries, and as many people might argue, the historical injustices that help build that wealth as well. I wouldn't go too far on that one, but either way, it's not a matter of race or racial iniquity. It's a matter of economic opportunity.
When you also accuse me of backpedaling here, is it technically a compliment? Because I'm like pedaling back to the answer that I already gave at the beginning of this debate.
Which is that it was completely arbitrary. and that they're just arbitrary lines that are drawn to separate people. There was no real difference between culture, nothing. And
I must have been fucking AFK for half this argument. There's no real difference between any group of people. Okay.
Here's a big question. Why do all these European settlers go to all these non-white countries? It's so unfair. Why don't they go settle,
What's the next question? We're getting bogged down.
From Sam Kim to BPF, one can accept and even question the reach of the feds while having a regional cultural identity. How is this not American?
It is American.